Hello and welcome to this video, and today we're going to be looking at this album by the Mavish Orchestra, Visions, make sure we can see it, Visions of the Emerald Beyond. Okay, now this album is actually an album by the second version of the Mavish Orchestra. So for those of you who haven't watched the videos before, let's just have a catch up. You know, Mavish Orchestra formed by John McGoughlin in 1971, around Billy Cobham, Jerry Goodman, Jan Hammer, Rick Laird. Really groundbreaking group which really laid the foundations for jazz fusion. As well as that, they had an incredibly intense approach to music which many other fusion bands didn't have, and where you would have thought this would have been unsuccessful in the music industry, the Mavish Orchestra actually very successful and sold a lot of records, did a lot of large scale concerts. The band eventually burnt out in 1973 after making 3 albums: The Inner Mountain Flame, Birds of Fire, and Between Nothingness and Eternity. And then John McGoughlin formed another version of the band, the second Mavishnu. This version of the Mavish Orchestra is not as highly rated generally as the first one, with many people plumping for the first 3 albums as being the greatest albums of them. And many people going for the very first album, which is very, very groundbreaking. My argument on these videos has been that if you track what John McGoughlin's trying to do with the Mavish Orchestra, is there is a progression there, and the progression actually it loses its way towards the end of the first version of the Mavish Orchestra, and you hear them treading water a little bit with Between Nothingness and Eternity, which John McGoughlin originally wanted to be an orchestral album. Following that album, he made an album called Apocalypse with the London Symphony Orchestra, and that was produced by George Martin. Mike Tilson Thomas conducted it. Mike Gibbs arranged it, and he had a new version of the Mavish Orchestra, which was expanded. It had string quartet, brass section, but was really based around a new version of the Mavish Orchestra, which was John Ponte on violin, Gail Moran on keyboards, Ralph Armstrong on bass, and Nora Michael Walden on drums. Although I'm not diminishing the other inputs of the band, I'm saying that was the basic new band. I've argued that that band was equal in virtuosity and intensity to the first band, and that actually what you hear with these later albums is a progression on. The ideas of the Mavish Orchestra has advanced, and what you are seeing John McGoughlin moving towards is a true Mahavishnu orchestra. He's trying to fuse, I think, rock music, jazz, funk, soul, sort of Coltrane, avant-garde, free jazz, with the sort of European classical tradition which he had grown up with as a kid. I've argued that Apocalypse, the album that preceded it, is an incredible album when you take that into account. But I think John McGoughlin is still searching for ways of making a group sound orchestral. Now, I think with this album here, Visions of the Emerald Beyond, he succeeded. Now, I'm going to have trouble talking about this album today, and there's going to be an apparent contradiction. This album here is my favourite album of all time. If I could only own one album, it would be this album. When I rated the Mavish Orchestra albums, I did not put this at number 1. I put Birds of Fire. And I think that's because anyone that's watched my videos knows I'm using a number of parameters to judge greatness, not just my personal taste. I'm also taking into account a number of things like innovation, technical skill, popularity, and I would say that the early Mavish Orchestra was more popular and definitely more innovative. If we were marking the albums just on innovation, I would have to go for Inner Mountain Flame, which is the groundbreaking album. But I think the ideas of the Mavish Orchestra, the thing that is created by that band, is advanced more on Birds of Fire, and it's an absolute peak for the band. It's also the most commercially successful of the Mavish Orchestra album. So wrapping all those up, I would say objectively, stepping back, that Birds of Fire is the most important and greatest of the Mavish Orchestra albums, with Inner Mountain Flame that far away from, shall we just say we'll put them joint number 1, right? But my favourite album of all time, if I get the right one, is this one. And here I think the ideas of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, the concepts that were pioneered by them, reach a peak here. I think this is the heaviest of all the Mahavishnu Orchestra albums. I think it's where the ideas are the best developed and the best executed. I think it's the most complete album, the most well-balanced album compositionally, and I think it's also the best produced. The sound of this album is just incredible. So what do you get on this album? Well, you get this new version of the Mahavishnu Orchestra with Narada Michael Walden on drums. Narada's playing a pivotal role now. You know, there's actually a composition of his on here. Also, we've got John Luc-Ponty. Now, John Luc-Ponty, I feel, is as great a soloist as a Jan Hammer or Jerry Goodman. I think he really brings a gravitas to this band. So it's not just about McGoughlin blasting everybody out the way. I think John Luc-Ponty is equal to John McGoughlin as a soloist, and I think that's very, very important on this album. Gail Moran again brings in some beautiful ethereal keyboard playing. Yes, she's not Jan Hammer. We haven't got that Jan Hammer sound on here, but as I've said, I think it's made up by John Luc-Ponty. We also have a brass section and a string section, and on this album they're allowed to stretch out. I mean, on Apocalypse we don't actually hear them. Contractual reasons meant that they weren't on the album, but we suddenly hear them here. And McGoughlin integrates the string section and the brass section into this, where I think this is possibly the greatest, most successful integration of orchestral elements into a rock band. And I think the key is the fact that it's been pulled down. You know, he's got a string section, he's got a brass section, but the way he orchestrates this album actually feels more orchestral than Apocalypse to me. And that's one of the really incredible things about this album. For me, it's a complete success. When you follow the album through, it's got an incredible flow from the first track to the last track. It takes you on a journey. I think this album contains definitely two of John McGoughlin's greatest guitar solos. The opening tracks, Eternity's Breath, Part 1 and 2, really state what the band is about. You hear that orchestral sound, you hear the choir, you hear the string section, you hear how John McGoughlin takes that development of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which is that sort of Indian music melody, the twists and the bends, and he plays with that. You hear John Luc-Ponty and John McGoughlin playing melodies in Eternity's Breath, and then they're being answered by melodies that have been played by the string section that almost sounds like a sort of Bombay string section. And I can remember when I first bought this album and took it home and put it on, I can remember as Eternity's Breath kicked in, after the incredible drum opening by Narada Michael Walden, and then the melodies kick in, I was staring at the speakers in disbelief. I had never ever heard anything like that, and it just seemed to point towards all music. I'm not a religious person, but I think the actual spiritual elements of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, which sometimes can be a little bit jarring, I think, at certain points, not necessarily in the music, but just in the whole presentation of it. And this is obviously a thing which it splits people down the middle, and obviously split the Mahavishnu Orchestra down the middle, and I think to some extent split this band down the middle. But I feel that those spiritual elements are the most integrated on this album, and it's actually really, really impressive when you hear that choir singing on the beginning of Eternity's Breath. That's followed up by one of John McGoughlin's great guitar solos, and for me, one of John Luc-Ponty's great guitar violin solos. Absolutely incredible playing. Narada Michael Walden is off the scale. I mean, as I have said a million times on this channel before, Narada Michael Walden is my favourite drummer. I think Narada, there's a spirit to him that goes beyond his playing. So I love Steve Gale, I love Vinnie Colaiuta, I love Billy Carbone, Tony Williams, I love them all. And they all have this spirit to some extent. But when I hear Narada Michael Walden, there's a positivity there where I feel he's playing like that because he is in the moment loving the music. So much drumming can sound like somebody showing off and trying to let them know how how amazing they are to you. You know, it's real showboating. And that's always something that can be a little bit off-putting and actually a little bit intimidating for the drummers. When I hear Narada Michael Walden play, it sends a message for me to be myself and just play the way I want. And I think that's because it's just pure joy. He's not trying to show that he's the next Tony Williams or the next Billy Cobham. He's not trying to be a rock drummer or a jazz drummer. He's just being Narada. Of course, all the great drummers do this. But for some reason with Narada, it seems to really resonate with me as a drummer. And I think this is partly why I love this album so much, because I think the drumming on here has just never been surpassed. It's up there in my top 10 drum performances. Incredible. You know. The second track on there is Lilas Dance. And Lilas Dance is like all those ideas of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. There's sort of the idea set out in Meeting of the Spirits, that sort of arpeggiated time signature, very intense, dark sound is in there. And then you've got that Dancer Maya, perverted blues, twisted blues. That's in there as well. For me, all those ideas that are floating around in the first Mahavishnu Orchestra are just done so well on Lilas Dance. This is going to be heresy for Mahavishnu Orchestra fans, but I would say Lilas Dance really embodies what the Mahavishnu Orchestra is about. You know, what's the Mahavishnu sound? What is it? I would play someone Lilas Dance. It also contains one of John McLaughlin's greatest guitar solos, where he just pulls together all those elements of avant-garde jazz, you know, Hendrix soloing, the odd time stuff, the Indian sound. He just pulls it all into that, and it's really chaotic. It also does this incredible device that the Mahavishnu Orchestra also, for me, pioneered, is where you have one theme come in, and then you bring in a country different theme, which are often in two different time signatures, and then you put the two together at the end, creating this great big, you know, overload of emotional intensity. So the way the track opens up, you know, this album opens up for me is absolutely so intense. It's for me, it's the peak. They follow that up with Can't Stand Your Funk. Now, I have argued that the funk was in with the Mahavishnu Orchestra right from day one. There is a split in jazz fusion. There's the jazz rock proggy jazz fusion, Mahavishnu Orchestra, Aldi Mola, Weather Report. And then there's the funky jazz fusion, which would be like Herbie Hancock. It would be like the later Fusak stuff, like David Sanborn, Marcus Miller. There's that funky side of fusion. And actually, Weather Report sit right in the middle of those two things. But I've often felt that the funk was so heavy with the Mahavishnu Orchestra right from day one. There's some funky stuff on the first album. John McLaughlin came up in the 60s working in a lot of rhythm and blues bands. He, for me, is one of the great funk guitar players. He can play in that James Brown 16th note, you know, up and down strummy way, absolutely incredibly. He doesn't do that so much in the first Mahavishnu Orchestra, but he does it on the second Mahavishnu Orchestra album. And Can't Stand Your Funk really pushes the funky side of the Mahavishnu Orchestra to a peak. I think they actually released this as a single. You know, they were hoping this would be a hit record along the lines of Chameleon, I suppose, by Headhunters, which had been a hit just at that time when this album came out. After that, the album starts to go what I would say is a lot more proggier, and it starts to break down, and we start to get acoustic parts, and we start to get like there's an incredible cadenza by Stephen Kindler. The album ends with one of those short tracks that we got on Birds of Fire, you know, where you get these very intense climbing chords. So it starts to open up and weave in and go down. It's time to take us on a journey at that point. When you flip it over to side 2, we then get Cosmic Strut, which is a Narada Michael Walden composition. Now, I'm going to discuss this more when we get to Inner Worlds, that Narada Michael Walden's writing voice takes over a little bit on Inner Worlds. And it's not that that stuff's bad, it's just whether this can be classed as the Mahavishnu Orchestra anymore. But here, Cosmic Strut is full on Mahavishnu Orchestra. It's one of their great moments, and it's so funky. Again, it's got one of McLaughlin's great guitar solos, right? Absolutely incredible opener to side 2, and incredible drumming. And then we go again the album then goes on another this journey. We get this sort of almost like bombastic, operatic tune. If I Could See, I think it's called. I haven't got any notes here, so I'm going totally off of my memory. And then that launches off into a jam. This is one of the things that I always felt you never got with the Mahavishnu Orchestra studio albums. When you listen to the live stuff of the Mahavishnu Orchestra, especially the bootlegs, there's this incredible jamming intensity going on, and they play a track for like half an hour. On the studio albums, it's there, but it's paired in. We never really feel like they're letting loose fully. You know, it's being controlled because they're studio albums, as you would understand. On Between Nothingness and Eternity, we start to hear it, you know, but nowhere near the intensity of some of the bootleg albums that we all know and love. On Apocalypse, one of the things I love about Apocalypse is that it must have felt like a live album for them to make that album. They're in a studio playing that stuff with an orchestra, and they're playing it live, and they stretch out with the solo. And I've always given that album a lot of points for having some really incredible McGoughlin solos where they stretch out. On Be Happy, so I couldn't quite remember the name of the track. On the track Be Happy, we get this segue from If I Could See, which is absolutely incredible, with the band sort of, it's almost like Charles Ives, we get two bands marching across each other, and then it emerges out into this jam, and there we are, like, and they just start to play. It's incredible to hear a band with that level of instrumental virtuosity playing flat out with that sort of production value and recording. It's absolutely incredible. You just feel like they're completely free. They're not watching the clock. And it's a moment again, and this album's full of these moments of definitive Mahavishnu Orchestra moments. You know, this is one of the great moments of the Mahavishnu Orchestra. This moves on, and we get a Jean-Luc Ponty sort of improvised solo on violin, which I think is called Pegasus, which John McGoughlin claimed writing credits for, and this, I think, upset Jean-Luc Ponty a little bit, which may have influenced his exit from the band, although I think it was the fact that he exited because he knew he was ready to go on to be a artist himself and sell a lot of records, which he did, you know. We get some string quartet stuff, and we go on this journey again, and very much like we did to a smaller extent on side one. On side two, we get this longer journey, and it ends up with John McGoughlin on a track called On My Way Home to Earth, where it opens up with a sort of almost like John Coltrane, Elvin drums duet between John McGoughlin and Aronoff Michael Walden, and John McGoughlin's playing through this 360 degree frequency shifter, and it's just again one of the great moments. The Mahavishnu Orchestra's played with this idea of the drum and guitar duet. They do it incredibly on the track Dream, but for me this is the definitive moment where John does this. But it does something else, because as this tune progresses, we hear the full force of this orchestral version emerge out of this stuff. And the whole thing again does this sort of Charles Ives thing where it just slowly turns around into this huge orchestral ending to the album. This album is full of some of the most incredible moments committed to record, I think. The other day I was chatting to my students about the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and I played them some stuff off the first album, the second album, and then I just put this album on just from the beginning and put it on, and then you saw the shock in their eyes. And what they do is they then get pieces of paper or their phones out and they make a note of the album, like, what the hell is this that you're inflicted on me? It is that powerful an album. It's been labelled by the critics as being, some critics have said this is one of the Mahavishnu Orchestra's worst albums. It's a sellout, you know, that they've bought into the funk. This is not the case. This is somebody who has not listened deeply to the album. There's moments on this that are more avant-garde than anything else on any of the other Mahavishnu Orchestra albums, possibly barring Inner Worlds off, Miles Out off Inner Worlds, which is the Mahavishnu Orchestra at their most extreme. And we'll get onto the next video. But yeah, this has always perturbed me. If you look through the videos, you'll find plenty of videos here where I've questioned why the jazz critics, you know, talk about jazz fusion in the way they do, so you can go and check that out. But anyway, it is my favourite album of all time. I can always put it on and enjoy it. And that's it, really. I can't say anything more about that. This is one of the great moments for the Mahavishnu Orchestra, and then one of the great moments for jazz fusion, and it's definitely in there as one of the greatest jazz fusion albums ever made. So that's what I've got to say about Visions of the Emerald Beyond. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I've said a million times before, if you like it, like it. If you want to subscribe, but most importantly, please leave a comment. Thank you very much.